Welcome, and thanks for turning out for this. As you know, this intellectual journeys idea is simply that everybody has a story, and when we see each other professionally, we don't always know people's stories and how they came to do what they're doing and why, and what other choices they had, and what maybe even what obstacles they had to surmount. So Bill Tierney, as you know, is Wilbur Kiefer Professor of Higher Education in the Rasier School and University Professor Emeritus. He is also founding director of the Pugliese Center for Higher Education. He got a BA at Tufts, an MA at Harvard, an MEd at Harvard, and a PhD in administration and policy analysis from Stanford with a concurrent MA in anthropology. He's written, well, I think what I saw may be out of date, but what I saw was that he has authored or co-authored 12 books, let's say at least 12. He's edited and or co-edited many others and many articles in places like the Chronicle of Higher Education. He's often interviewed and quoted in major media outlets, including our own LA Times, but not, of course, limited to that. And he's got within his field of higher education and policy analysis, he has a remarkable range of subfields and interests. It would just take too long to read you what they are, but there are certain themes that run through them that I think are really interesting. Besides, what you would expect, that is how universities make decisions and policies, the role of faculty, various aspects of that. He certainly has been active and in those things, but other things too, a particular interest in diversity, in equity, in equal access to education, and also the culture of higher education, and along with power and ideology and the cultural politics. He's also interested especially in Native Americans and higher education. So all of these things come together in Bill's work. Let me just say, end on a personal note, I know Bill from our days, I should say years, in the academic senate. I hung around on the executive board during the year of his presidency as immediate past president. And that was a time when the relations between the faculty and the administration were not always smooth, to put it mildly. And I saw Bill negotiate some very difficult situations and always admired the way he was completely calm, listened to everybody, took pains to understand their views and what they were, why they were saying the things that they did and taking the positions they did. And it was really important to have someone like Bill at that time. I think he is the first academic senate president I know of who could bring his expertise in higher education to bear on the duties of the Senate. And that really served the university well at the time. Or to put the point another way, he's the first one I know of who actually could use his year as Senate president to get material for his next books and articles. And when things can come together that way, it's great. So Bill, thank you very much for being here, and it's over to you. We will have, Bill will talk about his career and whatever he wants us to know for a while, and then we'll have some discussion and questions and answers. So Bill, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I should start by saying that Gibb is the guilty party. He's the one who brought me here. He was dean when I was hired at SC, so you can blame him for everything I'm about to say. You probably don't need to know that I was born in Brooklyn, although that might be useful. But there's a typology they have about what constitutes an academic, why someone becomes an academic. And I also often in my talking, I've talked about higher education as a calling. But I actually am the opposite of that. I never thought about being an academic. I never chose the academic life. I sort of fell into it. I bumbled into it. However, I don't know if I believe in kind of the model they have of why someone becomes an academic, irregardless of field. But it sure fit me. And again, I didn't know any of this when I was growing up, when I was going to school, but I like to read, I like to write. And I'm kind of a stereotype of the academic in that way. I think I'm more an introvert than an extrovert. And I think oftentimes when you're at academic parties, you're in a room full of everyone feeling awkward at the same time, wondering how long they've got to wait. Can they finish their glass of wine and get out of here? I was an undergraduate at Tufts University. I majored in English, and I was blessed that I was there at a time when, this is the 70s, when there were no requirements. And I was not horrible in the sciences and mathematics, but I was never drawn to it. What that meant is that I could read all the time in Tufts. I read everything: social science, fiction, literature. I majored in English, but gosh, I read so much and I loved it. I really, really loved it. One of the things that also made a big impact on me was I had to make some money to make it through college. And there was an advertisement at the time, it was the equivalent of the LA Weekly. It was called BAD, Boston After Dark. And it said, interested in working with people, call John Root. And I ended up working for 2.5 years at the Pine Street Inn, a home for homeless men. And I was offered a full-time job there. If I hadn't gotten in the Peace Corps, I would have worked there, and who knows what would have happened. And there were two things. I was good at it. There were a lot of young kids who would work, and they were horrible because they were obnoxious to the people. These were guys who were alcoholics or drug addicts. And all this, the Pine Street Inn was about was, this is a place where you're not going to freeze to death at night. We'll give you a free meal and a bed, and you could work and you could stay there. And then during the day, they'd go out again. And I just really liked listening to people and talking to people. And again, I didn't know that listening was a big deal, was going to be a big deal for me, but it was something that I really, really enjoyed. It made me think about my own life by trying to understand other people's lives. But I finished it at Tufts, and I applied to the Peace Corps. My other two brothers, older than me, they were in the Peace Corps as well. They had been in the Peace Corps. And I went off to Morocco and I learned Arabic. And again, as somewhat foolishly or romantically or whatever, I wanted to be way out there. I didn't want to be in a city. I wanted to be out in the bled, is what the country is called. And they let me do it. I was the most isolated Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco. I was in this little town called Tahala, and I was the only foreigner. And I had all of 12 weeks of Arabic training, and everybody else was flabbergasted. Who is this guy? And I would teach English. And again, I was a pretty good English teacher, but I think I learned a hell of a lot more than my students did. And again, it really made me think about difference. What does it mean to be different? Who's better? Who's worse? How, you know, and these are folks who, there was no electricity in the town. It was the quintessential Peace Corps experience, no running water, no electricity. And again, for a middle-class kid, I just learned so much and I loved it. Although it was, the first couple of months were really tough. I came back, I got a master's degree at Harvard. And I wanted an experience. I wanted to keep doing things that were not kind of the typical, I didn't want to work at the thought of working at a business or something. Again, it's not that I'm saying anything negative about that, but that was not, I was just not interested in that whatsoever. And I ended up at Fort Berthold Community College, which was a tribally controlled college in Northwest North Dakota. So in the space of 12 months, I went from one of the world's warmest climates to one of the world's coldest climates. I discovered that I like warm more than cold. And it was the same thing again. And it was, the tribal colleges came about, I should say, in the late 1960s. And the reason was that if 100 kids graduated from high school on the reservation, 97 of them, and went to college, 97 of them would never get a 4-year degree. And the tribal colleges thought, we can do a better job of it than sending our kids away and having to go through the cultural suicide that they faced. So there I was at Fort Berthold. And again, once again, I was the only white guy in an all Native environment. And this was somewhat different. Again, I didn't realize this at the time. I can say it now, but all of a sudden I needed to figure out, how do I get things done? And people don't act the way I'd act. I mean, folks who know me, I'm kind of neurotic about time. If you say we're going to begin at 12 o'clock, I will sign on at 11:59. That's not the way it works in terms of Native temporality. And it's not better or worse. It's just, it's a different scheme. And I had to learn how to be effective, and I loved it. And again, I was the academic dean at a tribal college, but an academic dean, I should point out, we were in trailers. And the trailers were where the classes happened. And then we would drive all over the reservation, which was 1,000 miles, trying to offer classes in a dispersed learning method. It was before computers. I finished that and I applied to graduate school. And although I got into Harvard, I wanted a different experience, so I went out to Stanford. And again, it was a fantastic experience. And I should also point out, you know, and I don't think many people are able to say this, that I went to grammar school. It was a Catholic grammar school, and I had all nuns. And I know that folks can tell jokes about nuns and, you know, so they're crazy and all this. That was not my experience. The nuns that I had were committed women who were really professionals in terms of helping you not just learn material, but learn what it means to be an educated person. I went to high school at Horace Greeley High School, and it was a great experience. My favorite teacher was my chemistry teacher. And chemistry, I could care less about, but she really helped me and made me think. Tufts was a great experience. Harvard was a great experience. And Stanford was the best. I mean, the only thing about Stanford is that and this is academe, you constantly feel like, how the hell did I get here? I don't belong here. And in fact, I can remember the very first day. By then we had computers, and you had to go to this terminal center and you had to log on. And I am a computer idiot. And from day one, I have been a computer idiot. And the very first day I logged on and I did something, and the whole screen was flashing invalid, invalid. And I thought, oh my God, I haven't even started and they've caught me because I don't belong here. And I don't know if I belonged here, but I sure enjoyed it. And I chose people to work with. with a historian, a linguist, an anthropologist, and a guy in higher ed. And they let me do whatever I wanted to do. I found my way over to anthropology. I spent an awful lot of time in the anthro department. I got a master's degree. I wrote a thesis, and I wrote a thesis that was comparing the work of Jean-Jacques Rousseau with Pierre Bourdieu. Pierre Bourdieu was a French sociologist, and at the time, nobody in education knew anything about him. And he's impossible to understand. And once you get into that, you meet other kids, other students, and I started reading Foucault and Lacan and Derrida. All of it was esoteric as hell, but it really situated me in a very different way than the typical grad student. And what I ended up doing was I did a dissertation where I looked on higher education as an organization that was a culture. And again, I didn't realize what I was getting myself into at the time, but we had been thinking a lot about higher education and universities and colleges as structures. What's the structural issue at work? And that wasn't me. And I was trying to say, wait a second, there's a culture that exists for the organization. There's a culture that exists for faculty. And I'm actually writing something now that's contradicting this, given that time has passed. But we speak about 4 cultures of the faculty. The faculty is a profession. It's different than plumbing. It's different than accounting. Faculty is a campus where you are. Faculty is a discipline that what a chemistry professor or my friend Michael Waterman does is very different than what I did. I can kind of envision what Greg did in classics, but his life was very different from mine. And then there's a global idea, and the global community, the global culture is very different. So I was working on that. And then also student culture was different. And, I mentioned in a minute ago that there's a sense of cultural suicide. And I thought about that at the time, theoretically, what we were saying was, this is the way students learn. And basically, it was something that made intuitive sense unless you were different. And then you had the assumption was, we can help you assimilate because we're not going to change, you're going to change. Well, why wouldn't poor low-income students, students of color, Native American students, gay and lesbian students, why would they not find academe as a hostile workplace? So that's how I spent a lot of my time, beginning to think through these ideas. I finished that, my dissertation becomes a book. I go off to Boulder, I have a postdoc for 2 years. Again, with very bright, very policy analyst focused folks who let me do my thing. Ellen Chaffee and I, who ended up becoming president of not 1, but 2 universities at the same time in North Dakota. She and I ran around and we did 8 case studies of different colleges and universities, and that became a book. At that time, although I loved Boulder, and I met my future husband, Barry, there, I wanted to leave, and we wanted to go. And we went off to Penn State. And, in my first couple of years at Penn State, I had a lot of good fortune at publishing a lot, writing a lot, getting a fair amount of money for a young guy, so that I kind of zoomed through promotion and tenure. And again, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I enjoyed it and I really liked it. But again, at Penn State, it was a fraught time because we were going through a lot of problems. And one of the issues had to do with gays and lesbians. And at that time, we didn't have a law school at Penn State. And we wanted a non-discrimination clause that said, you can't discriminate against gays and lesbians. And, it's funny, this is what I learned firsthand about administrators. They go, we'd like to do that, but we just can't do it. It's just, it would be illegal for us to do that. And there was no law school, so everybody's wandering around saying, well, I guess so. And I was a young assistant professor. There were undergraduates, not grad students. And we decided this is not right. So it was right around this time. It was in before Halloween. And we decided that we were going to have a protest where we were going to walk around Old Main saying, we cannot be tricked. We will be treated fairly. And there was a group of us, I was the only assistant, but there were associate and full professors. And we went to the president, and there was a vice president there who was very smart. And he said, well, we just can't do it. And I said, look, I'm telling you, you're going to be embarrassed if you don't change this. Something's going to happen, and I'm not going to tell you, but you're not going to like it. Poof, boy, did he get angry. And we left the building. Fortunately, the vice president was a smart guy. And he said, he asked me and the senior who was my co-chair and said, what's going to happen? And I said, oh, we can't tell you. And he said, how about if you don't do whatever you're going to do, but you can have a commission that studies the issue and then makes a recommendation. Long story short, the board chair came in. It was the first woman chair of the board of trustees. We met with her secretly. We ended up getting this thing put into play. And pleasantly, I saw the secretary of that president some years later, and she said, he had left. And she said, nobody ever made him angrier than you did. And I thought, well, I don't know if she mean that as a compliment, but all right. And I realized that you have to push a lot to make things change. I should say also my academic profile at Penn State was similar to SC, that I've always done more research than teaching. I've never taught undergraduates. I've always taught graduate students. And I would say that I absolutely love research, and I love doing research and writing. Close after that, a close second is advising graduate students. I've advised a lot of graduate students on dissertations, and I know a lot of folks don't like it or aren't good at it or something. It's one of the best things I've ever done. I mean, I just really love working with a graduate student with an unformed idea and taking them from A to Z and seeing them defend their dissertation. It's great. Out of that, I wrote a book on organizational culture at Penn State. I also wrote something called Building Communities of Difference, where I was trying to work on the idea of difference rather than similarity. What would that mean for higher education? And we also edited a book called Naming Silenced Lives, where we had largely people of color, but also women and gays and lesbians write about what's it like to be in academia. And again, it was an exciting time. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but it was fun. And it was fun. And I also felt that there was some type of change that was happening. This was also a time when AIDS was on the rise, and that was really horrible. And it's hard, it's hard. However horrible in many veins the pandemic was for those of us, AIDS was it's a lonely fight when you're seeing people who are so much younger than you are, in the 20s, dying. And what is academia going to do about that? What's higher education going to do about that? And I felt that I needed to make my voice heard, even though it was not necessarily to my betterment. And at that time, this commission that we had at Penn State we came out with all these findings. It was this big brouhaha. There was lots of fights and things, but I wouldn't, I would encourage anybody to get involved. I liked to be involved. So out of that, I had a sense of what I needed to do in terms of policy, that diversity was going to be a central part, equity and diversity was something that intellectually, theoretically, but also practically on my own campus. And then in the policy arena, I wanted to do. I should also say that when I was an assistant professor, there was an old guy in the center that I was at, Bill Toombs. And Bill said to me, and he's probably, when I say an old guy, he was an old guy to me then. He was probably younger than I am now. But I remember him saying, I'm going to give you the best advice you're ever going to get. And this was when he was on sabbatical and he had come into the office for something or other. And I said, what's that? And he said, when you have a sabbatical, get the hell out of town. And I have been rigorous about that. Now, Barry and I do not have children, which is a longer story, which is unfortunate because of being gay at a particular time. But because of that, we have been able to travel. And I've had Fulbrights in Central America and Australia and India. And then I also had a scholar in residence for a year in Malaysia. And then I ended my academic life with a fellowship in Bellagio and European University Institute in Florence. Fantastic. We could talk about that forever. I should also say that I found that I liked to talk and write for different audiences. So just my academic colleagues, just writing in academic journals was not enough for me. I wanted to reach different audiences, and Greg mentioned the LA Times, but there was a bunch of different places and formats that I've tried. And also, when we came to SC and we started getting involved in diversity and equity and stuff, I needed to figure out how, we created a counseling program for kids in high school to get them into college. And one is, it was a strange thing for me because I'm a higher ed guy, but I spent a lot of time in high schools, and everybody in the center mentored, the secretaries, the faculty, the grad students, the students, everybody, and me. And it was one of the neatest things I had done, and I was able to write a lot about it. But again, helping a high school kid who's a junior, figuring out what he needs to do to write a college essay is a very different undertaking than trying to help an assistant professor get tenure. And I'm not saying one's better or worse, it's just really different. And it was fun trying to figure it out. And, and these relationships, if they work, go on forever. I mean, and some of this is really cool. I'm going to have coffee today with a guy who is now working at UCLA and was my mentee and went to UCLA. I have been emailing back and forth with this guy who just completed his dissertation. I mean, this is a really heroic student, and we went to his wedding. Poor as can be in South Central, and went to UCSB, got his master's at SC, just finished his doctorate at Cal State LA, and the future for him is unlimited. And we just went to the opera on Saturday night. If you have a chance, tonight actually might be the last night or this weekend. Omar is at the LA Opera. It is stunning, really, really stunning. And I took this kid who I'm particularly close to and his fiance and to see Omar. And Carlos is about to get his doctorate at UC Riverside. And he says, hello, Dr. Slaughter. Doing that stuff is exciting, and you have to figure out how to get money, how to do the traditional stuff, but also try to change the world. And all of these are natural outgrowths for me. It's true, Greg, that I wrote in a lot of different ways, but tenure, academic freedom, governance, all these things were just kind of natural outgrowths of what it is. And the end result for me was getting up in the morning was always exciting. I always, gosh, I've got so much to do. I can't figure out that I can't take on anything else. And then something else would come up. Now, I don't want to talk forever. So one of the last question you've got, or you had for me was, what am I thinking about SC today? And let me say 4 things about SC and sort of where I'm at today. And I don't want to be a gloomy Gus, but I'm kind of a gloomy Gus. So let me give you one nice thing. And that was soon after I arrived at SC, there was some scandal that we had. Compared to recent scandals, it was a fairly low-level scandal, and I honestly forget what it was. But the LA Times called me and they said, and they talked to me about it and they quoted me. And the guy said, is there anybody else I should talk to about this problem? And I said, yeah, talk to Michael Jackson, the vice president for student affairs. I said, he'll have some good insights. And I'd only been at SC for a year, but Michael was a nice guy. And I called Michael and I said, hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up that LA Times might be calling because of whatever the scandal was. And Michael went crazy. He said, have you gotten clearance from the president's office and the provost's office? And I said, no, I just took the guy's call. He said, oh my God, you're going to be in trouble. I said, well, why? And he said, you have to get clearance before you talk to the press. And I went, oh, brother. So I was worried and I put down the phone, I pick up the phone and I called the provost, Lloyd Armstrong. And I said, Lloyd, I might have put my foot in my mouth. I might be in trouble. And he said, why? And I said, well, I just talked to Michael Jackson and the LA Times called and I talked with them and, they're going to quote me. And he said that I had to get clearance. And he laughed and he said, you have tenure. You can say whatever you want. Michael works for me. He can't. And I said, wow, great. Do you want to know what I said? And he said, nope. I'll read it in the paper tomorrow. At that time, I felt really proud to be at SC. Flash forward 30 years, and the whole nonsense starts to explode at SC. And I was talking on background to some of those reporters, and things start to, come out daily. And this one reporter said, can I quote you? And I said, yeah, sure. I mean, by that time, who cares? What could they do to me? Other than that Max would never talk to me again, which he never did. And he said, well, thanks a lot. And I said, why? And he said, because we've talked to a lot of faculty and nobody wants to be quoted on the record. And I said, well, you can quote me on the record whenever you want. And I put the phone down and I felt really sad. Okay, so there's number one. I felt really sad of how we had transformed from 30 years ago when we had a provost who said, say whatever you want. The second thing is, and this is probably something folks haven't noticed, but last spring, Stanford got a $1.1 billion donation from a donor. And in the old days, Steve and Max as well, if they had gotten that, what we would have heard was terrific for them. And now we know what we need to do. We're going to get somebody to give 1.2 billion. Not illegally, not the crazy way it ended up, but that we're going to do that. I don't hear that at all now. And I'm someone who believes at a research university, we cannot survive simply on tuition and dinky dollars. But that's out the door. And when the pandemic hit, the reflex of the administration was to say, man, we're in a financial hole. We have to stop putting money in retirement accounts, which I just find unethical. Max, however crazy Max was, would have invented some insane idea. And he would have brought one of the board members to him and said, I'm going to make it Guardians of Troy. If you give 100 million, I'm only going to give it to 5 people, only 5 guardians. And undoubtedly, because the board all hates one another, they'd say, well, who are the other people you're thinking of? And he would have said, well, da 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 da. And he'd go, if that guy's giving, I'm not going to give. And Max would have said, well, who do you think should give? And he would have suckered the board to give $500 million. And we wouldn't have had money taken out of our wallets. But there was no mention of that. The third thing has to be with football. And again, I haven't spoken to Max in years. At one time, I was very close to him. He went to our wedding, which was a big deal at the time. And I had lunch with Max one day. This is a long time ago. And we were suffering through another shitty football year. It was like we were 6-4 or 7. I don't know what it was. And I said, is that a problem? Do you think that's going to be a problem? And he said, Bill, I don't really care. He said, we're better than that now. The university has to be about the faculty. We have to attract better research faculty. That's what we're about. Every now and then I want us to make a run for something, but I don't want us to be so focused on football. Well, I thought of that when we hear this nonsensical idea. Really, does anybody believe that the athletic director calls a guy the afternoon after the last football game? The guy gets on an airplane, flies into town, and the next day the president, the provost, the chair of the board, and the athletic director meet him and sign him to be a football coach? Really? I mean, it must have been one hell of a contract, and it was. And that's what we've become. What is the claim to fame now? Is football. And again, I love football, sort of. I'm more of a Dodgers fan, to be honest, which is hard these days. But my brothers went to Notre Dame. I was at Penn State. We're going to the CU football game this Friday. But the thought that football has come back to where it had been, that Bill Plaschke is the guy that we rely on to write good news about SC, is too bad. And then the last thing, and then I'll shut up, and that's just, and this has nothing to do with the Emeriti office, but, never having been retired before, I do find it kind of baffling the way the administration treats the retirees. I mean, I don't really care because I've got other venues, but last year, some friends of mine and I read Ulysses once a week, all year, by Joyce. I'm reading the novels of Saramago, Jose Saramago, once a month with another group of friends this year, once a month, 12 novels. The other place we own is we own a place in Santa Fe, and Santa Fe College, the great St. John's College, the Great Books College, has these summer seminars for 1 week on great topics, and they attract people from all over the world. Now, granted, it's Santa Fe, and it's beautiful in the summer, but they're also doing a winter online thing. And, I can find all this, I have found it, but I find it baffling that the administration, it's too much to say that we're persona non grata. We still have that parking pass, which is nice, but really, there's a lot of potential that they're not willing to exploit. I just find that, I don't know, if asked, I would say that's not a good strategy. But let me shut up here because I know that you guys want to talk, especially supposedly probably about these last comments.
Thanks a lot, Bill. This was wonderful and riveting. And I have to say, I agree with every one of your last points. You've really said what I've been feeling very much. So there's a lot here to discuss with Bill. Just throw it open. We're a small enough group, I think, that people can just speak up, but if you want to raise your hand or something, why don't you use the raised hand rather than try to ask questions on chat, which is kind of cumbersome. I believe in the living voice. So please, anyone who's
Yeah, maybe I'll do. I usually wait until the very end to ask the question, but I think that you know, with what the Bill is saying, that I certainly agree with a lot of things what Bill just talked about. But with the pandemic in the past couple of years, that there are a lot of distant learning. So in other words, instead of in the classroom, I am a physicist. So when I have to teach, I remember my teaching assignment was one semester I have to teach the graduate course. The other semester I teach the general education with 150 students, huge class. Okay, but now there are actually people doing that very well, and all the courses are very well prepared online. And I find that some of the students actually enjoy the online studies because we actually, there's a Nobel Prize in physics. He actually did some experiment. He found that on the average, students' attention span is only 20 minutes. And typically they could only follow on the average, 7 new concepts in 20 minutes. After that, it's just a waste of time. They sit there and they were not able to absorb anything new, okay? And so the online course actually has the advantage because students can sign up and then after 20 minutes, they find they are tired, they can stop it. And by the time they are refreshed, they can come back and do it, okay? And that would be actually a tremendous new development in terms of the classroom teaching. Now, the university are also at this point of time under the tremendous pressure to have the faculty, of course, the teaching course. And we all know that in the university, we have tenure system. And the tenure system, as Bill is talking about, has the advantage. You can say something, whatever you have on your mind, and the provost will not say no to you, okay? So you could not say it, which of course the tenure protection really helps. But on the other hand, we all know that in the university, there are a fairly number of faculty members. Once they get a tenure, they start doing very little. They're not necessarily the best teacher. They're not doing that well in terms of their research. And that's what we call the dead wood, okay? And I think we all know that there are so-called dead wood. And so in terms of the university, the future of the university, and we really don't need those dead wood. And in particular, with the possibility of this distant learning thing through the internet. So the question I have for Bill is, have you ever thought about the tenure system, whether that one should be able to modify the tenure system? So the tenure system will protect those faculty. They're good at the research, they're willing to speak their mind, and they have the job security, they could do that. But on the other hand, tenure system doesn't have to be the one to protect those what we call the dead wood. And what would be the possibility for the university? So Bill, maybe you have you thought about it. Maybe you could share your thought with us.
Here's something that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, but I think it's I hear about it a lot, so I think it's going to be codified soon. I, I think I don't want dead wood. I mean, who wants dead wood? I guess unless you're going to burn some wood. But the fact is that the shift has been from tenure to non-tenure track, and the vast majority of folks are now non-tenure track. When I was in Rossier, when I came, it was about 80-20, 80 tenure, 20% non-tenure track. Today, it's the exact opposite. And here's the thing that I don't think people are processing very much. So when you're contingent faculty, you're asked to teach, generally, you're asked to teach an inordinate amount of classes, 6 classes a semester is the sort of thing that they do in Rossier. That's what you're asked to do, nothing else. Now, when I was an assistant professor or when I was a full professor, yeah, I had it parceled out in terms of research, teaching, and service. But if asked, I did an inordinate amount of what I think of now as uncompensated work. I reviewed articles, I reviewed tenure dossiers, I reviewed in the school, I wrote letters for people outside of the school. I was a consultant to a reader for foundations. Just all this stuff that I did for free. And I did it because I thought, well, again, part of it again was it was fun, but it was not compensated. I don't know why, if I were a contingent faculty member, I would ever do that. I'm not being paid particularly well. I don't have time to do it. You have me teaching all these classes. Shared governance, dead. Why participate in shared governance unless you want to move out of being a not contingent faculty member and move into administration? And if that's the case, then you're never going to say anything critical of the administration or you'll get in trouble. I think that's is and will fundamentally change higher education, and it will be least felt at places like Stanford and Harvard, but it will be felt, and we should. I have to give a talk to AGB in January. AGB or February, I guess, the Association of Governing Boards. It's the trustees. And they want me to yet again talk about shared governance. And when you get with trustees like to say, oh, the faculty, that it's so slow, blah, 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 blah. And they want to know how to get along with faculty. My first slide is going to be game over. I mean, the thought that we have shared governance today, it wasn't all that great when Greg and I were university Senate presidents, but it doesn't exist. And the problems right now, where does the problem in higher education exist most evidently in terms of people? It's the board. Look at the crazy board of trustees at Michigan State. I mean, they've had not 1, but 2, but 3 votes of no confidence. I mean, and it's not anything the faculty have done. It's that the board's incompetent. Look at our board. How did we get rid of the president? We got rid of the president by giving him $7 million. I mean, wow. They didn't give, if they wanted to get rid of me for $7 million, I would have thought about it. I mean, is that board competent? So the faculty, I just think that the thought that the problem lies in tenure track faculty dead wood, that's a worry of 20 years ago. That's not relevant today, for better or worse.
Yeah, I think, Bill, I agree that the faculty administration, I mean, this work together. Personally, I had a very, very good experience because when I was the Senate president, that was 2 years after Steve Sample came online and Lloyd Armstrong joined USC as a provost. I happened to be the Senate president at the time. And it so happened Lloyd was a good friend of mine before he even came to USC. he actually is my a research competitor. Okay, so we knew each other way before that, and so we were able to sit down and privately and discuss, and that was the real faculty and administration. We can honestly exchange our idea about thinking. Then we have, of course, at that time, you may still remember that we have the strategic planning. I think Gip, of course, certainly knows that very well at the time. And that was probably one of the very few times that faculty and administration actually could work together. Of course, the whole culture was changed because some of you may still remember that we have the well-known dean of law school at UC Berkeley by name Irving Chemerinsky, and he took over the Senate. And then I remember that he actually literally, because Steve Semple actually came to the Senate meeting, he enjoyed talking with the senator. And Irving Chemerinsky literally pushed him out and not allow him to speak. And then Steve told me that he swore he will never step into the Senate meeting again. Okay. That, of course, afterwards, I think that's why when the Gray and the Bill, when you were Senate president, you find that it was very difficult to work. Although privately, from what Bill is telling, that actually Lloyd Armstrong was okay, because when you walk in, he will give you the advice. You can say whatever you want. Okay, so this is currently, I think that I know a little bit about Senate, and I think that the collaboration between the Senate and administration is very, very difficult. Okay, but that, as I agree with Bill, that that's probably is gone, and it's going to be very, very hard. And so far, I think the problem is that the university, certainly through their actions, are not taking advantage of the presence of our retired community. Okay, many of us, like Bill, yourself, and the Gip here, and the great there, I think that we all had experience. We may be able to give an input to the administration with our experience, but the administration certainly are not. I think so far, the RFA is trying very hard to see if we have somehow managed to be able to, I think their primary purpose is to look at this as a potential donor for the university on the financial side. But on the other hand, I think that so far, I have not seen that the real positive action that they actually value what we learned, especially for those of us, we have enjoyed our tenure. We can speak out and, all those sort of things. But the hope is that, one day that we might be able to have some impact on the administration. So I think what the Bill, if you still have access to the administration, I think that we may have to, take advantage of that, and hopefully something might happen.
So
Bill?
Bill, I have a question. So you've studied various kinds of educational organizations and their cultures. How would you characterize USC's culture, and what other institutions are we similar to? And is there something that we are evolving toward that you think that might be encouraging us for the future?
So there's a big difference between privates and publics, obviously. So I really, and I don't say this is better or worse, but we're obviously very different than a place than UCLA. I think there at one point there was a desire that we could be a USC version of Stanford, and that was aspirational. We weren't going to be Stanford, but we could be like USC or Stanford, because the assumption was you had to attract greater faculty, however you wanted to define that. And you wanted to do, critical work. I think now we're going back to the way we were. So we're an okay place. we will be an okay place. We will mimic what other places do. And we're not going to be a standout or a standalone. And I think that's unfortunate. Steve tried a bunch of things, when he started at Association of
Yeah,
West
research university.
Pacific Rim, I
Yeah,
think.
Pacific Rim, yes. Pacific.
That was an interesting attempt, and it was an attempt to create kind of an international AAU. If you look at that association today, it's kind of irrelevant. It's a big, there's like 50 or 60 institutions in it all over. It's not so critical. But we might go to the college football playoffs this year, and that's the thing. Do you think that at a Stanford retirement, meeting, if they were having this thing, that they'd be talking about that? I don't think so. I think they'd be talking about, well, what I've heard is that we might create a different alliance of institutions like us and Northwestern that are
Yeah.
When I was at Penn State, this was the first great realignment. When I was at Penn State joined the Big Ten. I remember the president at the time, Bryce Jordan, said, "We're doing this to improve our academic excellence." And the student newspaper came out with an editorial and said, "If we're so concerned about academic excellence, why don't we join the Ivy League?" And I thought, that's exactly it. This alliance, do you really think this alliance is going to improve, that we're moving to, it's going to improve the academic excellence of the institution? I don't think so. It's
Bill,
yeah.
this is John Slaughter. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Bill, how can higher education respond to what is highly likely to be the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action? What will be our options?
Let's say that the Supreme Court does what I think they will do, which is absolutely kill affirmative action, that there's no more trying to reconfigure it or something, so that affirmative action is dead. Well, there's fair amount of criticism to universities, that the elite universities in particular, that really they've just moved people around. That the elite university, it's like football. They're all looking for the standout kid who's happens to be African American, and they all want him. And we haven't increased that. What we have to do is a much more concerted effort, which I started and wrote about in the high schools. We have to be tied in the high schools at the hip. Everybody should be involved. Not everybody, because not everybody is a good mentor. But, if you go in some of these high schools that I've been to, the number of kids that are largely student of color high schools, the number of kids from these high schools in Los Angeles that go to a 4-year institution is abysmal. It's as bad as what I said about with Native Americans. It's like 3 out of 100. And we can argue till the cows come home. I appreciate that. We need people in the tech and plumbers and all that. I certainly I pay through the nose when we get a plumber. But the thought that we should emphasize tech education as opposed to 4-year bachelor's degrees economically is not true, but it's also true when you actually talk to the people who are pushing this. When you talk to foundation program officers and they say, well, we need to also emphasize technical skills and that sort of stuff. I say, where's your kid going to go to school? And they go, what do you mean? I said, your kid, not some other kid, your kid. Well, my son is going to go to a 4-year institution. So that to me is apartheid, that we're going to say, well, we should really improve the tech going skills of kids in low income, high diversity schools. And that will solve it. That will solve nothing. And we know that economically over a lifetime, you still make more money if you have a 4-year degree. And I also think we make a mistake. My last book was on democracy. We make a mistake when we say that a college degree is all about the next job. It's not. It certainly plays a critical role, but we are about creating citizens, active citizens. And, you know, one of the things I will say to the board, I bet donuts to the dollar, I could ask this board, I would ask them, what's the percent of students of color who are undergraduates at SC today? And you would think if they don't know, they would acknowledge that they should know. I would say, what's the amount of revenue, donations that was brought in the last year? And you would think that an organization that has fiduciary responsibility would be able to say, we brought in X million dollars. What I want to say also is, what percent of your students voted? I don't care who, I don't want to know who. I want to know what percent of your students voted. And I will bet you there's not one university in America where we could get that answer. That's disgraceful. Education to me is at the heart of the democratic experiment. And the point is, I'm all for verification and all this stuff, but the point is to get people to vote. I mean, democracy is voting. It's not that, 10% of the people decided who's becoming the next mayor of Los Angeles. But we back off from that. And I think it has to change. And all of these things, John, say to me that if affirmative action, you would hope, if they kill affirmative action, that we could move forward. You and I should write something on that for Inside Higher Ed.
I hope you do. Anyone else? I really
Karen wants to say something.
Karen?
You're on mute, Karen.
Yeah, you have to
Still
unmute
on mute.
Karen.
Thank you. A slight detail there. Bill, I would agree with you. I would think, though, that one of the major aspects, or certainly a factor, when college is not free, which it should be, I happen to agree with you that we should be looking at it in terms of civic involvement, all of education. But it seems to me that at this particular time, with the complexity of the world as it goes along, that we might want to have college certainly free at that point. And that might eliminate or any factor of moving into the tech field just because it's quicker to get money which is needed from people that don't have it. So that if it was free, then they might, you might find a wider applicant pool just by that thing alone. It's sort of like when they took the SAT off too, all of a sudden the applications went up.
Mhm.
So we have to look at some of the very simple things that we might be doing to limit those applications and acceptances.
Public higher education should be free. The California model that the first Governor Brown put forward was emulated throughout the world. It wasn't just the United States. And why was it? It was because tuition was non-existent. There were fees that one paid.
Yes.
Now, the fact of the matter is, though, the students that I worked with, and these were, really, really poor kids, that money was a stumbling block, but not the block. You had to speak in their language. You didn't say, well, you can apply for a Pell Grant and get this. You had to say it's free money. And free money is free money. It's not a loan. But the financial literacy of kids in high schools, everybody, but especially poor kids, is very, very low. This kid that I'm going to meet for coffee today at 4, I remember when he got into UCLA in the first week, he sent me an email and he said, am I ever lucky? And I said, why is that? And he said, I just got an email from this Nigerian, and I'm going to give him my bank account number, and he's going to put $100,000 into it. And the tragic thing is that, if that was your son or daughter, you'd say, you knucklehead, what are you doing? But kids who don't have folks who are hooked up in terms of financial literacy and educational literacy don't know how to navigate this. It's really tough to figure out how to apply. I didn't know how to apply to college. I just knew that I was going to college. I never made a decision to go to college. My brothers went to college, and it was just a given that I'm going to college. And that's not true with the poorest of poor kids. And it's, it's to the country's loss.
Other comments, questions? I don't want to keep you too long, Bill, but I do have a question for you. Actually, there's a lot I'd love to discuss with you, because you've hit on so many topics that have really seemed very important to me. But here's one, just to get back to this question of what has happened with tenure. And I just want to see what you say to this. That one thing that the tenure system did that really underpinned it was a certain view of faculty and our profession and what we did. That is, that we did research and we taught and we did service to our community, but that these things were all interwoven, and that we were all of these things. And now, of course, we have research faculty and we have teaching faculty. The teaching faculty don't have time, as you said, even to do research. They all want to, but they just don't have time. So even questions of academic freedom aside, which seems to me the big issue with the disappearance of tenure, as you say, there's been this redefinition of us, and we had no voice in it.
Right.
And so what do you think it means to be a professor now?
Yeah, I don't know if I would want to do it now. I mean, again, I didn't really decide about it, but I guess I had a lot of options if I wanted them, but it seemed fun. Things have always seemed fun to me. And it doesn't seem like fun now. And you're absolutely right, Greg, that, nobody decided that we're going to go. And I'll tell you, a tragic mistake I made is I was on sabbatical. I came back, and at that time, the dean at the time, Karen Gallagher, had this idea that she was going to create these online classes with John Katzman. And because of who I was, they hadn't decided it yet, but they took me to lunch, and they said they're going to do this online thing. They're going to hire faculty all over the country. There's going to be this great market. We're going to make all this money. And I remember saying to them, I think this is screwy, but it's not going to impact me. You're not talking about my area. I don't do anything in the MAT. So, who am I to tell you no? Well, I was totally wrong. That totally transformed the school. And it transformed the school darn quickly. Because it was at the first time successful. It went from, I don't know, just to make up numbers, we had an FTE of 100, and then we had an FTE of 1,000. Karen was happy as a clam because she had all this discretionary money, but none of it was to advance what you and I would think of as a tenure track agenda. It was just to keep growing at the expense of growing. Why do that? And that's it's a shift in the thinking of our administrators
toward a consumerist model. That we're selling a product and we're here to make money. And I agree with you. You know, I went into this too because I loved what I was doing, and I'm not sure I would love it anymore. For this reason. And I have to say, you know, look what happened in the School of Social Work, where they did this. And the current provost's attitude to that is, well, they just made a lousy deal with this company that got to keep 60% of the take, instead of saying, you know, maybe we should rethink this whole thing.
Right, right. I mean, and all of that, it's a, you know, when I came to SC, it was looked on as entrepreneurial, and that was a good word. And I think there's a lot of that is good. You do want somebody like me as a young full professor who's just hired to run around and try to create stuff and, you know, work with the
Yeah.
dean and do these things. You want that. You don't want a guy who just sort of says, well, I'm tenured. I'm going to look for everything. You know, you're going to bring things to me. But the entrepreneurial model that became true in my school with Karen and frankly, I don't want to blame the dean. It was the president and provost.
Yeah.
And this was not Stephen Lloyd. I mean, it was real, or even Stephen Max. It was Max and I'm forgetting.
And Michael Quick.
No, the woman. Who,
Oh, Beth Garrett. Yeah.
Beth
Beth
Garrett.
Garrett.
Yeah.
Beth was this on steroids. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
we're going to put the pedal to the metal and we're not going to stop. And if you do stop, you're looked on as an impediment.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's a loser. When you got to, you know, we all know this from teaching. When you're in a classroom and you got a lot of people who speak and there's one or two students who don't speak, you want to know what's going on. And you want them to know, not that necessarily that you know, but that you would be enhanced if they participated. Well, with Max and Beth, that was the exact opposite. You're like, you absolutely sit over there in the corner and don't say a word because you're creating problems. We got to move. And I understand that. It's just tragic. And look what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
That's the reason I mentioned earlier, because I think that when I talk about the internet course, I'm talking about some of the course you could do that, like the basics, like the physics course, introduction to physics, you could do that. And the interaction, you should still be there. The faculty and the student, when they have a time, they should get together. They should open up to have a time either through Zoom or an office hour to interact. Okay. But on the other hand, I think that for the financial situation, the university will have to do certain things. And USC happened to be one of those universities. We don't have the endowment to support. Now, in terms of tenure, I certainly enjoyed tenure my whole life, but I think that for tenure, to me, is still mean that you do what you like to do. Okay, for instance, I retired for almost 10 years now. I'm still doing my research. I'm not required to do it, but I love to do that. I still interact with other people. So I think the tenure should be different now. The definition of tenure should be different. And
the other way to do that is, and again, this comes full circle, and maybe we should end here, is the thing about what I said about retirement. There's a double whammy there. One is that it does seem, I mean, having been raised in an Irish Catholic family, not very gracious, sort of like goodbye and good riddance. But it's the dead wood, it's a horrible phrase, but the dead wood are people who are tenured and they're largely over 60 and they don't retire because retirement is like death. If I retire, I'm going to die. And I mean, it is true, as you get older, we meet a lot of people who are passing away. But the thought is that the folks I am conversing with now who are retired are living really lively, fun, intellectually charged lives. And if you were able to portray that, you would hope that you would have these other folks go, huh, maybe it isn't as horrible as I've envisioned. You know, because I've had folks, guys who are not retired, and they'd say, what would I do? I don't play golf. And I was like, well, I said this in an article I wrote about a year ago. I said, when I was young, when I was in my 40s, there was a guy, we had a dinner party at a conference, and this guy said, well, Joe, you're going to hit 65 next year. Are you going to retire? And man alive, the guy said, I don't play golf. Why would I ever retire? And it was said in a way that we stopped conversation. Like, okay. And I honestly thought at that time, I went, because I never had thought about retirement. And I went, geez, I don't play golf either. I guess I'm not going to retire.
Yeah.
And that's, impoverished. That's an impoverished way of thinking about people who are our age. And if people were incorporated in a more positive way, you would hope that it would encourage folks to retire.
Yeah, actually, that's the reason why in the past, I always tell people that the best time of my life is my stress-free retirement time, because I could do whatever I could, and I can be very, very still positive. So I agree with you totally, Bill.
Well, on that note, that upbeat note, let's all thank Bill a lot. This was a terrific session. And thank you all for coming, and
Cool.
go back to enjoying your retirement, everybody.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Jeanette. Bye.
Yeah.